Hello. Thank you for coming to this webinar. Actually, for like 13 minutes earlier, we just came here to know that everything works very well and every technicalities are great. If you hear me, please put the names, put maybe the pluses in the chat so I can see that you can hear me well. Great. Hi, Shaban. Thanks for joining here. Cool. So we'll be starting in 12 minutes. So still we have time, and it's great to know that everything works very well. Hi, Sajjad.
Hey Mariam, how are you?
Great. You hear me well?
I can hear you okay. Can you hear me okay as well?
Yes, yes. Like we already have like 4 people joining us right now.
All right, cool. We can join in. We'll just wait, I guess. We'll start on in about 5 minutes
Yes,
exactly.
exactly. Yes, yes. I hope right now everyone is safe in their homes.
We'll start in about 4 minutes sharp, so
Mhm.
we can keep time.
Yeah, sure. But if we have some more people, let's say if they want to ask some more questions, maybe we can remain, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 minutes more. Are you
Yeah,
good with that?
yeah, I'm good with that. Thank you.
Great. A lot of people that joined us just a few minutes ago. I'm sorry. So we will start in 3 minutes sharp at 1:30 p.m. Armenia and Dubai time. Hopefully we're in the same time zones. So please keep with us. We'll start very soon. By the way, please in the chat, like tell me where are you now? Like what countries, what cities are you in right now? We'd like to know where our audience is right now. Okay. So yeah, Sajjad is from Singapore. We have Dubai. Hi, Sadrine. So we have people from Dubai, of course, people from Armenia, Yerevan. Okay, let's wait just for another like 30 seconds and we will start.
All right, Shelby?
Should we start already?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so we can officially start right now. And hello, everybody. Like greetings from Armenia. I'm from Armenia, and today's guest Sajjad has joined us from Singapore. Welcome everyone to the webinar series about evolving trends in the world of total rewards. And by the way, we have some new people, new attendants. Please write in the chat the countries you come from. It's interesting to know where our audience is right now. And this will make sure you hear me very well. And before we start, let me just go over a few things. First of all, those of you who don't know me, my name is Mariam. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Lucky Carrot, which is a platform helping companies to boost employee engagement with peer-to-peer appreciation and recognition. And today, our guest is Sajjad, who is the head of reward in APAC countries, Asia Pacific countries at eBay. He has extensive experience in talent management and acquisition, in HR transformation, performance management, and HR analytics. Sajjad has led and delivered many global HR transformation and change management initiatives and landed many best-in-class reward interventions for the companies that he has worked for. The webinar format is going to be the following. Sajjad will do the presentation for around 40 minutes, after which we'll be able to take questions from you during the 20 minutes of Q&A sessions. So dear participants, on your screens, you have a raise hand icon. And during the Q&A session, if you have questions after the presentation, please click on that icon. I'll see who's raising their hand and I'll unmute you and you will ask your question to Sajjad directly. And while unmuted, your video will still be turned off. If you have questions during the presentation, there is an icon called Q&A. Please put there your questions, which you can put them anonymously and direct your questions to not only Sajjad, but also to other participants. So if you feel like you want to chat with other participants and have discussions, do so. And of course, we have, just to remind you, we have 2 other upcoming webinars, and you can register for them by registering and using the same link. I can share my screen and you will be able to see the information about 2 other webinars. One is going to be just 1 week after this, April 28th, and another one is going to be on May 6th, and both of them 12:30 p.m. Yerevan time, which is the same as Dubai time, by the way. We're going to talk about the power of analytics, and we're going to talk about AI-driven decision making. So I think I've covered everything. Sajjad, you can start. The online stage is yours.
All right, great. Thank you. Morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Appreciate your presence here. It's my pleasure to share with you some of the things around the evolving trends in the world of total reward. I appreciate your time even more, especially in the past 3 to 4 weeks. I know we've got this barrage of online email meetings and webinars. So, I truly do appreciate your time for this learning engagement. Just going to quickly share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it. Typically, I've done a number of these, and typically I would do this at least over 3 to 4 hours. But obviously, due to the format that we have, and we're restricted by time, I do seek your patience and just bearing with me as I run through. Obviously, I had a couple of, I had a conflict in terms of, how much could I share, but I didn't want to discount basically what I was sharing. So our conversations need to continue. My aim is to just touch through at least the topics that we have in hand. Obviously, we won't be able to go too deep at this point in time. However, like Mariam said, we will be able to continuing to having these conversations in this session after the deck is over, but even offline as well. Please reach out to both of us if you have any questions. You want to continue the dialogue forward. You're looking for ideas. You're looking to brainstorm. We are here for you, and that's really the purpose of these sessions. This is one of the 3, like Mariam talked about. Before we get into the session, we did actually come up with a couple of polls just to get a sense of where you are in terms of your mindset, where you're standing. So I'll just pass over to Mariam to run the polls first, then we'll get right in.
Sure. Yeah. So on your screens, you will be able to see polls just in a few seconds. So yeah, you should already see the poll, which is in progress. Please just choose. This is like multiple choice questions. We want to know more about our audience. Please make your choices here in answering the questions, and we'll be able to get more information about you. And these are, yeah, by the way, this is totally anonymous. Good, go ahead. You should have the polls on your screens. If you don't have, just write me on the chat, but I see already people started answering. Cool. Yeah, just a few more seconds to go. Yes, hurry up, people.
We'll give you 10 seconds more.
Yes. This is an exam. If you fail, that's it.
No implications.
Yeah.
All right, shall we see?
Just a few seconds so that
Sure.
I make sure almost everyone answers it. Right now, we have like 70% already answered the
Okay.
question, 70% of the attendees.
Nice.
So I think, yes, 3, 2, 1, and I'm ending the poll. Cool, and I will share the results with you, and you will be able to see it on your screens, the results of the poll. Cool, so maybe
Very
we can
nice.
go ahead with the presentation.
Great. All right, so let's dive right into the thing. The agenda for today is really just to talk a few things on compensation, particularly pay transparency, equity analytics, and then in terms of benefits, I really want to talk about wellness in particular, especially financial planning and emotional health, and then we'll round off the conversation with performance management. But I want to actually start it as a couple of is a bit of a tangent, but please bear with me. I want to talk about actually talent and reward together. One of the observations that I've had, and I've worked for about three different industries over the past 15 years or so. One of the things that to me that's missing is this whole combination of talent and reward working together. When I talk about the evolving trends in total reward, I can't have that conversation in isolation. So we've got the business partners, we've got the shared services, we've got the centers of expertise. But what I usually see missing is them coming together and talking about a problem together, right? 70% of my conversations that I have with the head of HRs or the business leaders or even my regional business heads, they come to me with a compensation problem, but more often than not, actually turns out a talent problem, you know? And so when we dig deep into the data, when we start to have conversations, turns out that compensation is usually it is a problem. Yes, it's a majority of a problem many of the times, but there's a talent aspect to it which is usually missing. So we need to talk about talent and reward together. And one of the things like that's something that I'm focusing on is to talk about the integrated HR framework. Any problem that we're seeing in the organization, it needs to have a reward equation and a talent implication together. So as we talk through the topics at hand, please think of these topics. How does it impact the talent equation in your organizations?
Sajjad, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I'm getting some requests from people asking, can you talk a little bit louder, please? And
All
maybe
right.
come closer to the speakers.
Okay. I hope that this helps. Please let us know if it's still a problem. Um, and so one of the so I want to start actually talking about what is total reward. In Asia in particular, through my experience, this area is not really well understood, right? So I actually wanted to talk about, hey, we're going to talk about the evolving trends in total reward, but what is total reward? What I'm sharing with you is really actually my day job, really. So I talk about compensation, benefits, the area of wellness, performance management, M&A, global mobility, OD, which is organizational design and job evaluation and analytics. And as you can see, if I was to really pick on the whole area of performance management, global mobility, OD and JE, that's actually highly overlapped with talent management, right? When I talk about performance management, reward does not work on its own. It works with the talent management teams to talk about the upstream and downstream. When I talk about global mobility, right? So I'm going to send these employees on long-term, very, very expensive expat packages. but what value are they adding? Are they going to fill a role? Are we sending them for development purposes? What purpose are we serving? So again, a talent equation has to have, because if I talk about long-term expats, it's usually about 5 times an employee's cost. Similar for OD and JE. When we talk about org design, um, it's a lesser understood area in organizations. And if I ask most organizations, hey, by the way, when was the last time you did a full end-to-end org design job evaluation exercise? In 80% of the cases that I've observed or I've heard, companies have not done an org design, JE exercise in the last 5 years. And what are the implications of such actions not being taken? And so if I think about the ambit of total reward, we need to think about the end to end. The obvious ones are compensation, right? But as like I said, if I think about the end to end, I mean, I get involved in M&A regularly. I get involved in analytics, which is something that we'll talk about, and this whole area of wellness that's come up. So just to keep in mind, essentially, that we're not just in the traditional model where it's mostly compensation. The umbrella of total reward has drifted and shifted dramatically over the past few years. And why is it so important? The employment cost in every company is usually either the number one or the number two cost, the highest cost of the business. For manufacturing units, is usually the number one. For other industries, is usually the number. Manufacturing cost is usually the number two. But for almost all other companies, is usually the number one cost. So when employment cost is such a big portion of your P&L, why are we not spending more time really being smart about these decisions that we take? And so this whole area of analytics that I'm going to talk about a little bit today, but hopefully in our next session, is really to pay focus on why do we need to be more smart. If you think about the current environment, where employees are being put on furlough, many employees are losing jobs. Is there a better way for us to manage employment costs so we could avoid all of these? And so that's really a focus that we need to have. And then really, what is the impact of total reward? Companies take a very passive, some companies take a very passive approach to reward. Some companies take a very active approach to reward. If I give you an example of my first company that I worked for, Unilever, to me, the reward practices are really 15 years ahead. And I was very blessed that I got to see some of the reward programs and structures which actually led their HR strategy in totality. And so if you think about the impact of reward programs, you've got both the impact on a top line basis, how does it drive business performance? And so the first one obviously is performance management, right? And we'll talk about performance management later, but if you do the performance management right in terms of reward differentiation, in terms of top talent management, it really drives top line performance because employees are more engaged, employees are more motivated. And then incentive plans, we have ample research to say that incentivized properly, people do feel motivated, the performance improves. That's why we have sales plans, that's why we have commission plans. And then in terms of bottom line, obviously employment cost I just talked about. If the employment cost is such a big portion of your P&L, then why are we not being smart about it? Any decision we make has an impact on your bottom line. And then to end it, the org structure that I talked about, which is the OD and the job evaluation part of it, to give you an example, if you have 1,000 roles in your organization, if you change the grade for 100 roles, it is going to have a direct impact on your dollar value in terms of your P&L. So every aspect of job evaluation actually has a cost implication. So if you give examples of some of the pharma companies and some of the consumer companies, they actually make job evaluation a religious part of their process. You cannot hire somebody till the role has been evaluated. You cannot promote somebody if the role has been evaluated because it has a dollar value impact, right? And a dollar value impact essentially is a bottom line impact on your company's P&L. That's the impact reward has on both the top line and the bottom line. The one thing that I'm a big advocate of is that HR teams in essence need to become more external as they're internal. One of the struggles I've had with a lot of HR teams that I work with is that they're very internalized. Do they really understand what's happening out there? All the decisions we're making, so if I think about the talent demand and supply, right? How does my talent demand and supply of my company get impacted by what's happening externally, right? So for example, the situation that we are in terms of COVID-19, what impact is going to have in terms of unemployment rate, right? If this becomes an employer's market in the sense that employees do not have the negotiation power that they did maybe before the crisis, how does this change the hiring strategy, right? What are the macroeconomic factors that are going to impact how much salary increase I'm going to give, or how much bonus I'll be able to pay, how much performance I'm going to drive. So having an external understanding as HR professionals, to me personally, is absolutely imperative if you are to make good decisions. We cannot make decisions in isolation, internally looking at things and say, okay, this makes sense for the company, but not understanding how macro environment and how dynamic the environment is and how that impacts all the decisions that we make internally. So with that, let me jump into really what the trends are. Like I said, these are some of the things that I've observed, some of the conversations I've had with my counterparts in other companies, and some of the latest research that I've been able to read. Let me start first with pay transparency. And what is pay transparency, right? Pay transparency, very simply, is does your company have an open salary policy? It means that does your company allow employees to access, in a very simple way, all the salary ranges across the organization? That means I'm able to say, hey, by the way, my boss gets between A and between B, right? So it's very simply, I'm able to see what my colleagues get paid. And the reason why this has come up recently is this whole aspect of external platforms which allow employees to share their salary. Best example is Glassdoor. You can go to Glassdoor. I can go to Glassdoor and say, by the way, in Singapore, head of reward, how much do they get paid? I'm not I'm not going to talk about the authenticity or the correctness of the thing, but for many jobs in many markets, you're able to actually get an estimate of whether what I'm being paid is roughly equal to what is being paid in the market. So one of the research that I think this is from PayScale, they did was, how many companies actually have an open salary policy? And obviously, as you can see, predominantly, not surprisingly, companies don't have an open salary policy. But if we talk about what are the benefits of an open salary policy, right? You can argue and say, hey, by the way, actually open salary policy increases productivity because employees are not, always thinking about, hey, I'm being paid X, but my colleague is being paid Y. It boosts recruitment and retention because you can say, hey, by the way, in terms of your talent acquisition strategy, that we actually are open about a salary. So when you work for us, you don't have to worry about, hey, we're trying to hide something from you. Similarly, helps close the wage gap because you know that you're being paid only X% more or less than everybody else, and it's not like a 30% differential, which actually exists right now. And again, creates an atmosphere of trust because employees are not, and we know in Asia especially in my experience, we're always comparing salaries. My salary versus yours, and how come I am being paid less than my colleague. But then you've got this whole other equation where it says that potential consequences outweigh the benefit, right? That if you start sharing salaries, people and employees may not understand why somebody is being paid less or more than others. And I can personally vouch to that because if I take 100 employees in my company, everybody's salary has come to a point because of a lot of historical factors. And so if employees are not mature and if managers particularly are not mature, we cannot have the right conversation. So what is going to happen is that rather than trying to get a benefit out of it, we might actually end up opening a Pandora's box. And again, it's your choice whether you think this is a good thing to have or not. But many companies are actually thinking about having an open salary policy. What some companies have done is to do a middle portion, which is they don't open the salary ranges for all levels. Managers can see salaries up to their levels and below. So they're trying to control the amount of openness on open salary policy. This is a very interesting research, and this is, I think, about 3 years back that PayScale did. The essence of this survey is that people actually always, in general, have a very negative approach and a very negative perception about salaries. If you think about the top bar, which is people who are actually paid above the market, you can see that it's only 20% or so who actually were paid above the market, and the perception was the same as well. Predominantly, people who are being paid above the market, they still feel actually, oh my God, I'm still being paid below the market or at market. And as we go down, which is people who are actually being paid below the market, they're not only the sense is correct, but 83% of them, majority of them think that they are actually being paid below the market. And this comes back to the same point that if you're not going to have an open salary policy, the fact is, in general, people have a negative perception anyways. So they're going to continue to have this perception. Now, this is a different issue that the perception of having this understanding actually has an impact on your engagement numbers. Because if generally people think, oh my God, I'm not being paid well, that is going to have an impact on your engagement, right? So again, it comes back to the fact that how open are you and how comfortable are you to have an open salary policy? I'll move on to pay equity. And pay equity is something that's really come up in the last 2 3 years, predominantly, I would say, led by the high-tech sector. So I work for a high-tech company, and so I know that we are really involved in this. And the focus for the next few slides is really gender-based pay equity. But I would say pay equity runs across multiple number of variables. It's not just gender-based; it could be race-based, it could be religion-based, it could be language-based. So one of the things we do as a company when we've started doing this for the past 3 years is actually to release a D&I report, which really talks about all the D&I actions we're taking. And some of the actions we're taking, especially from a gender pay perspective, right? And this is a report from Gartner, and they talk about that 1 in 3 employees actually feel and report a pay gap, right? So they feel that they're being paid less versus the another gender for the same job at the same grade. And what does this mean? Research shows us that people who perceive a pay gap actually are the intent of leaving the organization increases, right? So if I just feel that, oh, I'm being paid less than my colleague for doing the same work for the same performance, but I'm being paid less, my intent of leaving the organization increases. And this roughly translates to 2.2% increase in turnover. Now you might say, hey, by the way, 2.2%, I don't care. My attrition is 20% anyways. So if it goes to 23% or 22%, it's okay, I can manage, right? But this is just the perception, right? And 2.2%, if you think about the cost of attrition, it's actually quite a bit, right? So at the junior level, research says that at the junior level, if an employee leaves, it hits the employee, it hits the P&L about one person's salary, annual salary. And at the higher level, it's about between 3 to 5 times annual salary. So if the perception is going to drive an increase in turnover, then that's something to worry about. Not to mention the whole aspect of fairness about paying people, similarly for the jobs done for the same level. What this also translates is that this perception of pay gap leads to a decrease in manager quality. That means your manager could be doing probably everything right, but if you have this perception, you might think that the manager actually is being unfair, right? So it actually impacts the manager relationship that you have. It actually could mean that you're being paid 30%, or you could actually get 30% more for doing the same job in another company. That's a huge number, right? So if I have a perception that I'm being paid unfair in my company, I actually think that I could get about 30% more for another company. And that could be a huge push factor for you to go out. And that equates to 50% worse than experiencing pay freeze and 20% worse than experiencing reduction in benefits. Now, these are staggering numbers. You know, if I, from a compensation perspective, as I think about this, I'm like, oh my God, if even if 20 or 30% of my female staff actually thinks this, right? And interestingly, I came across two young female staff in my company who I just found out they resigned, and I actually, got a conversation with them. One of them actually left because of having this perception gap. She felt that she was not being paid adequate compared to her male peers. And it was just really an example in reality that, like just the perception actually is something that drives people out of organizations. And so the essence of this is that pay equity matters. If I think about the laws that are now in place in US, for example, California, you cannot actually ask a female staff what their pay is when hiring, right? So you cannot, it's against the law. And I know a number of other countries, these laws are coming up. It might take a little bit of time to come to Asia, but as pay equity becomes more and more pronounced, as people start to make more and more noise, and rightly so, it's about being fair, then this becomes very, very important. So pay equity matters, number one. Just the perception of pay equity actually harms, the intent. Like I said, people will leave the organization just having the perception. And current efforts are insufficient. If you really ask companies, what are they doing right now in terms of managing pay equity? More often than not, you will say that they maybe do an exercise once a year. They'll check, yeah, if the numbers are okay, done and dusted. But it doesn't work that way. Research says that we can actually qualify some of why the pay equity numbers exist. But in terms of pure numbers, there's a 7.4% gap that still exists. You can argue that, okay, some difference exists in terms of education, organizational factors, occupation like doctor versus nurses, but there is still a 7.4% gap, unbiased between how men get paid and how women get paid. So lesson number one, ad hoc is unsustainable. And I can definitely tell you from my experience, you can say, by the way, every year, once the peer review is done, I'm going to look at all the numbers and I'm going to provide all my female staff a salary increase. But that's not going to be sustainable. It's going to increase the cost because every year you have to spend X dollar value to normalize the pay. It does not solve the problem because you hire 50 more people and the problem goes back to step one. So lesson number one, ad hoc is unsustainable. Lesson number two, like I said already, perceptions have a price. We have to reduce the perception. We have to be open about what pay equity gaps exist in the organization and have candid and honest conversations. And number three, it's the talent practices that actually are the culprit. So if I think about the fundamental issue that we have is the hiring. I'll give you a best example. In one of my markets, this is a big issue for us. And many times I have conversations with recruitment teams and they say, hey, by the way, we're hiring this female staff and we're giving her a 40% salary increase, which is just ridiculous for that market, right? And I'm like, yeah, you're giving her, this lady, this female staff a 40% salary increase, but she is still the least paid compared to the 5 other male members. So you're not really solving the problem. You're looking at the increase you're giving somebody, but once she joins the organization, and even if she's here after 4 years, that issue is going to be compounded because even if she gets promoted after 2 years, 3 years, her pay is still going to be less than the peers. So hiring decisions actually are the fundamental where we can actually solve many of these problems. Things like performance assessment, things like promotion decisions. Definitely, and then it's not just an Asian issue. I can definitely talk about developed countries as well, but there is a certain bias towards these, especially towards gender, and we need to close. So if you think about the talent practices when making hiring decisions, when talking about promotions, when talking about evaluation, when we're talking about assessments, we have to put interventions at those places. And only then we will be able to solve part of the problem, right? Because the unconscious bias is not easy to change, but where we can consciously have interventions, frameworks and structures where we can make sure that these don't become compounded, at least we're trying to solve the problem. I'm not going to go to the slide, but it's essentially just saying the same thing which I talked about last slide. That it's this talent practices from recruitment to hiring, performance management, promotion. It's actually a circle, right? If you mess up the hiring part, then the remaining three will get messed up as well, right? You could promote, but if you don't give the right promotion increase, for example, then again, the problem is going to continue on the next grade as well. And something that I'm seeing regularly, and we've actually seen, we actually did numbers where the average promotion increase for males was higher than the average promotion increase for females. And it doesn't come up because, you might say, hey, by the way, I gave my female staff 18% promotion increase. But what they don't talk about is that they gave a 22% promotion increase for the male staff. And when we ask them, why did you do that? They always have a very valid excuse, which I don't agree to. But again, that's the unconscious bias that's coming at play. So we need to start thinking about this. And we're not going to solve this overnight, let's be honest as well. But at least there's something that we need to start thinking about and put the right interventions in place. I'll quickly move to pay analytics, and I'm only going to touch very little bit on pay analytics because we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail in our next webinar. So hopefully, I hope you're able to join. I'll be able to dive a little bit more deeper in terms of how pay analytics can drive decision making. But for the purposes of our conversation today, I'm just going to touch what it means. This is what we call a pay analytics curve, right? And ideally, what we want to do as companies is to be in the rightmost lane, which is causation and simulations and forecasting. I would assume that majority of companies are somewhere near the ongoing reports and benchmarking. And if the couple of surveys that I did with some of my peers, it seems that that's fairly true. Some companies have started doing correlations, and I think there are literally just a handful of companies who have started doing predictive modeling. I think the easiest predictive modeling is more in terms of attrition, but they're starting to think about predictive modeling in terms of salaries as well. So what we need to do is move the analytics curve on the right side, move from our general benchmarking and ongoing reports to more correlations, more causations, and actually predictive modeling. And I think that would be the next power of analytics as far as I see. The next 2 or 3 slides are just a very basic example, right? This is a chart that I take to my regional head of business or my country heads at the end of every year. I go back to them and I say, by the way, let's review how we've done our internal labor market talent flow in terms of for our big market, at least where we have reasonable amount of headcount. I would say these are the number of people that we hired on the left-hand side. These are the number of people that exited. How many people did we promoted? And what is the current headcount, right? And you can say, hey, by the way, how does this help me? So you can say, by the way, clearly we can see that we're seeing maximum number of attrition in grade number 4 and grade number 5. Do we have a valid reason for it, right? Because if we don't have a valid reason for it, then that's something that I should be concerned about, right? And I would probably add that what is the annualized attrition rate here? And how does that compare with the market attrition rate, right? Because if my annualized attrition rate is lower than the market, then I shouldn't be overly concerned. But if my attrition rate is double of market, then oh my God, there's something massively wrong. Similarly, how many people are we promoting? And the numbers in the middle actually shows me how my headcount distribution is. Am I a top heavy organization? Am I a bottom heavy organization? Does this organizational structure make sense to me? So this is a very valid conversation for me to have with my leaders and my HR heads at the end of every year. And then we drive deep insights out of, where are the action points that we need to take for next year. This is an example of something that I did in my previous company. I know it's a very busy chart, but essentially what it's trying to say very simply is, as you can see, this is across the region, but FC means fixed cash, which is your guaranteed cash, and FC bonus is target cash. And what this is trying to tell me is how is my pay at each of my grade in each of my country versus the market, right? So I'll give an example. If I'm a high-tech company, I would say that when it's red, for example, the top left cell, which is UK and fixed cash, 95% means that I'm 5% below the market on my pay in UK for grade A, right? And the color coding is something that I've decided internally. I say anything 95 or less is red for me. 95 and 105 means no action for me because I think I'm okay. And 105 and above is completely low priority because we're paying people adequately okay. How does this come in handy? So if I take Brazil towards the lower end, I can see that almost in every cell, it's 80% or less. Now, in the current environment where we're not gonna have normal salary budgets, this would come in very handy because if I have to prioritize where I have to spend my money, this is where I would do. I would say, hey, by the way, Brazil is definitely in a lot of problem. I would much rather take money from, for example, UK, where I have mostly greens and blues, and I would spend that money on Brazil, for example. Similarly, I could use less money on grade A because they typically, for example, if it's top management, they clearly have more blues, and I would spend probably on grade E's and F's because I see a lot more red. So if you have a chart like that that shows you your market competitiveness across markets, especially from a regional perspective, this is very handy for me and something that we do every year. I'm able to redistribute the money if I need to and prioritize where I need to spend. So again, this is just one example of how I would prioritize, my discussions in terms of money spent across markets. Another thing that we do is to really compare cost of uh, basically fixed pay multipliers across markets and by grades. So if you take grade A is, let's say, entry level versus grade B, which is, let's say, a functional head, right? And this is a fairly common chart. I'm sure many of you have seen this. But obviously in developed markets, you would see that the difference between an entry level and a functional level is only 2.3 times in US. So if an entry level gets 50,000, your functional head gets whatever 2.3 times of that. So it's about 125,000 as an example. But clearly in developed markets, as you can see, the multiplier is very high. Where this becomes important is that if you have a top talent management program and you say that between entry level and a functional head, it takes 15 years, you have to manage a top talent to move from an entry level to a functional head level in, let's say, 15 years in China with a salary multiplier of 8 times. Now, within typical normal salary budgets, there's no way you'll be able to achieve that. So that's why you need to start thinking about interventions that if I promote my top talent regularly, how much salary increase do I need to give? Do I need to do other interventions to make sure that I'm able to meet this multiplier, right? So in most of the developed markets, again, the budgets are also smaller. So you might think, hey, by 2.5 times is not much. But with a 2% salary increase in Germany or a 2% salary increase in US, even getting that 2.3 times multiplier becomes difficult. And the typical challenge or the typical mistake we make in HR is that we would much rather pay somebody from outside 40% to hire them than promote our people from within and give them the right salary increase. And so if you think about your top talent management program, and if you know the numbers and how they multiply in these markets and what it takes for you to move your top talent management or top talent across different grades in a period of time, then you have to start thinking about the numbers and you have to start thinking about the budgets. Another simple example, and I think this is my last example on analytics, is how am I differentiating reward, right? A big portion of analytics is about making sure we're spending the right money and we're differentiating correctly. And I'm only going to talk about the top portion of this slide. If you think about the ratings, right, higher, on target, and lower, what this is saying is that in terms of bonus payouts, my higher rated employees got an average of 140% of the target bonus, right? And on target employees, which is basically the bulk of your employees, got 114% of target bonus. The question is, do we feel that the difference between 114% and 140% is adequate? Right? Because if this number was 120 versus 114, technically what we're saying is that we're not differentiating between high performers and on-target performers. And so high performers need to feel that they're being differentiated enough, right? Their bonus payouts are differentiated enough for them to be motivated and engaged. So is this something that your companies are doing? When you do your annual reviews, do you actually dig down and see how your bonus and equity, where applicable, you're differentiating enough so that there's ample differentiation between your performance ratings? And in my conversations with many of my colleagues, unfortunately, not many companies are doing this. They give out whatever they do based on your performance ratings, but they don't really take a call in terms of how have they differentiated their bonuses and salary increases and equity at the end of it. So you might have 10% of your organization who are like the best guys, like who are running the organization. But if you're not differentiating the reward, then really you're not really impacting. And so we come back to the same point that the top line engagement motivation that you want to drive has to come from reward differentiation. The other big area of an evolving trend is this whole AI powered HR decision making. And I want to talk about new compensation philosophy. We will go deep into what this means in the last webinar on the 6th of May. But I just want to leave a taste that with this whole all these new HR techs that are coming in, there are some technologies that are really focusing on this so-called new compensation philosophy. And I'll try and put it very simply for now. The new compensation philosophy is actually saying that we're not going to use salary as a performance differentiator. That means we will use bonus and we will use equity and other means to differentiate performance. But no longer will your salary be driven by just being the best performer in the business. That means if I'm working with a team of 5 people, all of us are roughly going to get the same salary increase regardless of the performance we do. And this is a new thinking that I'm hearing a number of companies do. My company has actually started this 2 years back. So we give salary increases not based on performance, but on other factors. But again, this is something that's very interesting. It's very, very different to what I've actually grown up with, because I've always felt and I've always heard, you do well, you get a big salary increase. And actually that's changing now. And we'll talk about a little bit more about this in our last webinar. I'll move on. So that's basically the three or four big topics on compensation. I'll quickly move on to the evolving trends and benefits. And essentially what I want to talk about is actually this whole area of wellness. The summary of this slide essentially is that we're living in an increasingly unwell world, right? All the factors that we have in people, if we talk about environmental changes, if we talk about economic changes, if we talk about pollution, if we talk about stress, mental resilience, 24-hour work culture, that's putting up a lot of pressure on employees to be well and perform at the highest level, right? And that's not really happening. Do we have the right tools right now to be able to support our employees? There's a big question mark. And so this whole new concept of wellness has come in, where we're thinking that benefits, traditional benefits, does not actually solve the problems that we're having in the world today. And so if you think about the evolution of well-being, we've actually moved from disease management to physical wellness because that's the most easiest one to handle. I'll give you a gym membership. I'll do preventive healthcare, right? But now we're saying, no, that does not alone solve the problem because physical is only one part of you. There's this holistic wellness being that we need to talk about and we need to solve for. And again, why is this happening? Like I said, 24 work cultures, people go on leave, but they're still connected and they're still replying to emails, So this whole perspective of work-life balance has gone away. The changing workplace dynamics, we've got this multi-generational workforce from, baby boomers to Gen X, Y, Z, and I don't know what's going to come next, right? And we've got this whole array of growing needs that, employees need to manage: work-life balance, health, travel safety. People are traveling more and more often. Unsustainable health costs. If you think about some of the medical inflation across markets, it's ridiculous, right? So you've got this whole area of pressures, and it deals from cost and non-cost pressures that we have to deal with. So what are we going to do about it? So well-being, like I said, is becoming more holistic. We used to start with physical wellness, but we're seeing more and more focus on emotional well-being, financial well-being, community well-being, right? And companies are saying, hey, by the way, we've never talked about emotional well-being. And in Asia, especially in particular, nobody wants to talk about emotional health, well-being. Nobody wants to talk about financial well-being, right? And that's the conversation we need to have. So a lot of companies now are saying, hey, by the way, at least we are interested to explore these areas. And we want to know, what does this mean? How can we help employees be better in terms of emotional health and financial health, right? And again, why do we want to do this? Because there's a direct impact on employee engagement. When employees are holistically taken care of, that means they feel financially secure, they're mentally sound, they're physically able. It helps employee engagement. It's about basically, in terms of research, 3 times the impact of providing vision and dental plan. It's about twice the impact of matching employees' charitable donations, 5 times the impact of offering computer benefits. And this research, as you can see, is three years old. If you think about COVID-19 right now and people who are losing jobs or they're getting a shorter paycheck, how much more has financial wellness become important? People are working from home 1 month at a time. How much more emotional health has become important, right? So through this crisis, fortunately or unfortunately, we're going to see a lot more focus on emotional health and financial health. If I give you just an example of the impact of financial problems, right? People who have a financial problem in terms of anxiety, there's a huge difference, right? You can see the numbers. There's a huge difference between people who have financial problems and who don't have financial problems, and how it impacts anxiety, it impacts job performance, it impacts life quality and family relations. Obviously, if you don't have, thankfully, any financial problem, you are much at ease. You have children, you have to provide food on the table. But if you are struggling with financial wellness, then obviously everything gets suffered, right? So the business case of financial well-being, and this is research done by Towers Watson, employees with financial stress actually miss about 5 days of work a year because they are under stress. They have to figure out what to do in terms of meeting the financial needs. They're about 5 times likely to report being in poor health, and it completely makes sense because mentally you're under stress. It is going to impact your physical well-being as well. They're going to be less engaged at work, right? Because they're constantly worried, and 4 times more likely to expect to work to age of 70 or more. And actually, after 5 years, this number is probably going to increase even more because you just have to work longer and longer to be able to meet your financial needs. So, in a very quick way, in a very summarized way, financial health is very important. It's going to become more important. Just to add one more perspective, if I think about the pension plans in APAC, in Asia in particular, I don't think they're very adequate. Maybe apart from a couple of markets, think about most countries and how the pension plans are, they're completely inadequate. And so we really need to start thinking about how are we going to plan for future for employees, and that comes under financial wellness. I'll quickly talk about emotional health. I'm conscious of time. Do you measure emotional health in your organization? Do you know how many employees suffer from emotional stress? Unfortunately, in Asia, we're not very open about sharing about emotional stress or even talking about it. We have the stigma that if I share, if I seek help, it means something for me. Do you know by markets what are the suicide rates in emotional illness? We know in some markets where the suicide rates are very, very high. And are you providing any sort of counseling apart from EAP to your employees to be able to manage stress, especially right now where employees are under a lot of emotional stress? What kind of solutions are you providing to them? And do you know how many actually suffer from depressions? I've actually come across a few cases where employees seem completely normal on the top, but they were under tremendous stress emotionally. And it just came out in a very, very wrong way. So what are we doing about that? So to sum it up again, emotional health is something that is an evolving trend. Companies are going to become even more in tune, especially with the crisis at hand. I expect to see a lot more work on emotion. I was just on a call before this, and some of the HR leaders actually just said that they are going to work on how they can support their employees emotionally and come up with new programs. I'm going to move to the last part, which is performance management. And I'm going to ask you, do you know what these companies have in common? Which is one of my companies as well. And the short answer is that they have actually gone away with performance rate, right? And one of the surprising thing that I hopefully some of you know is General Electric in this list because they were the custodians of performance management in terms of ratings, a couple of decades back. So they've actually moved back and said, okay, ratings don't work. And it's not surprising because 71% of companies think that their performance management system needs a reboot. Ratings or no ratings, they are just not happy with the performance management system. If I look at the research over the past 30 years, and I've read reports from some research done in 90s to now, on an average, 2 out of 3 companies are not happy with performance management. And predominantly, they think that it doesn't work. More than 60% employees think that the performance reviews just actually don't lead to improved performance. Only 30% of managers and 6% of CEOs thought their reviews were effective. 1 in 4 HR executives feel the current performance management system actually truly reflects employee performance. If these are the numbers, then essentially what performance and what behaviors are we trying to drive, right? So whatever system you have in place, it just does not serve the purpose. Whether you have ratings or not is a different thing, but the essence of performance management is to drive the right behavior, to motivate, to engage, to differentiate performance. And clearly from this survey and clearly from what we're seeing year after year, the performance management systems are not really solving the problem. One of the things that in the last 2 to 3 years that have come in quite handy is this whole focus from let's not talk about, I'll give you performance feedback and that becomes growth coaching. No, what they're saying is that the growth mindset has to be on the spot at every given point in time. And what this means is I give you constant feedback and that helps with growth coaching. And the essence of this is really around creating a coaching culture. So what we have at eBay with our performance rating actually is a manager becomes my coach. And so we're expecting every manager to become a coach of their employees. And so they're giving employees constant feedback and talking to employees constantly rather than talking to them maybe twice a year. And they're getting feedback from all the peers, from leaders, from teams, from cohorts. And so employee is getting coaching from peers as well, from managers as well, from leaders as well. And what this means is employees constantly being aware of where they're falling short, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and it helps them improve their performance on a live basis. And to end, that what this means is that we have to create a culture of recognition. You can't say once a year I'm going to evaluate you and then I'll decide what your reward is. It has to be an ongoing basis. Rather than focusing on one time annual increase, we have to talk about recognition on an ongoing basis. And that's really, if you look at the research, that monetary or non-monetary recognition actually impacts employee engagement like tremendously. So we have to talk about base pay, equity, experiences, recognition on an ongoing basis. And if managers have constant conversations with their employees in terms of coaching conversations, they will be in a much better state of play at the end of the year when actually they have to make performance evaluations. Because right now what happens is most managers talk to their employees twice a year. Many managers are missing and they're asked to evaluate employees at the end of the year. How fair do you think that conversation is or evaluation is? But if they have a constant state of play where they're involved in employee as being a coach throughout the year, then you don't need to doubt the evaluation. I'm not saying there's going to be 100%, but at least they're in a much better position to evaluate correctly. So with that, I am going to stop. That was the last slide I had. I apologize for rushing through. But like I said, I didn't want to shortchange the topics at hand, and I'm sorry that I couldn't go too much in depth. But I'll stop here, and I'm very happy to take questions on the call now, but also to continue the conversations after the session as
well. Cool. Dear participants, you have a place on your screens right now, which is called Raise a Hand. If you have questions, you can raise your hand, and I'll unmute you, and you'll be able to ask your questions directly to Sajjad. So actually, you can start with raising your hands if you have questions, or else I have some people that have already asked me some questions to actually direct it to Sajjad in the Q&A part. So you can start already going ahead. Okay, so here we have a question that says, is there any specific trend in the area of wellness in the decision to join or stay in a company, and how important is it for employees? Yeah, Sajjad?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I missed
Yes, of
part
course.
of it.
Is there any specific trend in the area of wellness in the decision to join or stay in a company, and how important is it for employees?
So I would say that based on my experience, the whole area of benefits and wellness is important, but is usually not the key decision-making criteria when employees want to join. So companies may have really nice wellness programs, or you might be offering really nice wellness programs. But it's something that's a good to have. Predominantly, I still feel it's the compensation package that drives bulk of the decision making, right? I'll give an example. Facebook and Google have very nice offices and they give all the free lunches, right? But are employees going to join them for a crappy pay but very nice benefits? I really, really doubt, right? And again, even from a staying perspective as well, you might have really nice wellness programs, but if other things are not in place, employees are not going to stay in that organization. So it's a good to have. It drives engagement. It shows that company cares about employees, but it's not the only thing that you can focus
on. Okay. And we have another question. It goes like this. Does it happen when you have two types of compensation packages you offer to the potential employees or candidates depending on their preferences? When someone is not interested in physical wellness benefits, but cares more about like total medical insurance for him and family members, others care about development, participating in intellectual conferences or certifications, etc. So does it happen when you have like two types of compensation packages you offer to the candidates based on their preferences?
In my experience, in all the offers that I've made, I usually we start with one conversation. Again, it's linked to what they are being paid right now. So you always start with one conversation, and you have a little bit of leeway. So how much you're willing to push. Obviously, it comes down to negotiation. What you offer may be something that's acceptable to them, and you
Mm-hmm.
stop there. Many times employees come back and say, no, sorry, that's not good enough, and that's where basically the negotiation starts. So I would say that we wouldn't have a sort of a we won't have two plans. We'll start with one, but from a recruitment perspective and compensation perspective, you know what your limit is. That means if you've offered 80, you know that the max you can offer is 100. But if they're asking for 120, then you just say that it's not going to happen. And similarly for employees as well, they might have a minimum baseline. They'll say that you will join, but unless you're being offered 100, you're not going to join. So again, at least in my experience, I wouldn't have two packages. I will start with one with a threshold in mind that I'm not going to cross.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have a comment here in the chat that says offers should be flexible. Make them choose what they need from all possible packages. So, I mean, like giving a full preference package and then let them decide what they want. And we have another question which goes, what should be the communication strategy to increase the pay transparency?
I think it's a good question. I think the first one is for you to figure out what level of pay transparency you're trying to achieve. Like I said, are you trying to achieve 100% pay transparency, which means if your company has, let's say, salary ranges, you're going to publish all the salary ranges on a public area where all employees can access. Or number two, which most companies does, is that every level has access to that level of salary ranges. For example, if you have 10 grades and I'm on grade 6, I can see salary ranges up to grade 6 and below, right? I won't see ranges for 7, 8, 9, 10. So I think the first question you have to answer is what kind of transparency you want. Is it 100% partial or none? And if you want to achieve, let's say, a mid-level level of transparency, you have to then decide how you want to communicate. You can do two ways. One, you can say, send an email saying, by the way, we've decided to be open, transparent about communications. And now you can go on the portal or whatever system you have, and you can check out what the salary ranges are, which is being very, very explicit. What many companies have done is that they actually open the ranges during the peer review process. So if I have a team, I will be able to see ranges at my level and the teams and the grades below. So you're not opening it up completely, but you're not hiding them again. But again, you're not being explicit about it. Each approach has its own merits, pros and cons, and it also depends on the size of the company, right? So if it's a huge multinational of 100,000 employees, the discussions are going to be very different from a company that's a smaller company, right? So you have to, like I said, number one, decide what level of transparency you want. Number two, you want to be very explicit about it. Or number two, the other thing I would say is that you need to think about the capability of your HR teams to have questions that are going to come in. Because whenever you start the open transparency policy, employees and managers are going to ask questions. If you're not ready, if your teams are not ready to answer those questions, then I think it's going to create a bigger problem.
Yeah, got it. So people, if you have some questions, yeah, Shaban, you will be unmuted. Shaban, you're unmuted. You can speak.
Hello, I think you're on mute, Shaban.
Yeah, Shaban?
Can you hear me now?
I can
Yes,
hear you,
very
yes.
well.
Hi, Sajjad. My name is Shaban. I'm from Dubai and work for Coke as head of HR. First of all, really very good presentation, I must say, and really good insight on the comp and bench strategies. One thing which came to my mind was just to build on the same block where you're talking about open pay. When people have a view on who's earning how much, I think it also goes hand in hand that the maturity of an organization plays a very vital role in such a pay structure and the strategy, whereby people are able to not only understand the reasons and basis for somebody to be far ahead of them or behind, they also have the aspiration and will to have their own selves developed to an extent that they can reach to that stage. Now, having said that, it's like easy said than done, because as we talk about, especially Asian countries which are not that developed, it creates more of how do you want to put it, uh, enviously jealous, if I'm able to put it right.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
that, oh my god, he's making so much of money, and I'm.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think HR has a very vital role to play, whereby they not only keep the employees engaged positively, also make them understand that how can they achieve these aspirations and reach to those extents. That was first comment. The second one which I wanted to make was, we've talked about performance management and performance enablement, which is now being called in our part of the world.
yeah.
uh, Giving constant feedback. Now, I just wanted to share my experience, what we are going through.
Sure.
That your supervisor, your manager, your manager's manager, everybody is giving feedback, and there is a likelihood of a confusion being created in the incumbent's mindset, whereby everybody is talking different language. So my suggestion to that was that there has to be same language being talked about, very crisp, very positive, and constructive. Secondly, again, it starts with the recruitment strategy, which you rightly said, that all the decisions which are in the strategies uh, to the employee life cycle which get into action, they are basically starting from the recruitment level. If the right person is not being recruited with the right mindset, I think that's where the problem starts, and then it has a far-fetching effect.
Great. No, thank you for sharing that. No, I completely agree. And I'll comment to the first one. I think the open pay policy, I think, has to be complemented with the level of compensation, sort of the structures that you have. If you're going to say, hey, by the way, I have an open salary policy, but none of the other compensation sort of policies are in place, right? How do you drive compensation? How do you give salary increases? What's your policy on benefits? What's your policy on equity? What's your bonus plan? Just opening one policy does not solve the problem, because as I showed earlier, total reward is a fairly wide ambit, right? Just taking care of one part is not going to solve automatically all the other parts, because eventually one you start a conversation with pay, and people are going to be like, hey, but how do you manage my bonus, and how do you manage promotions or something? So I think the entirety of things has to be looked at. The entire reward framework has to be looked at in from a compensation perspective, even to your point about performance management as well. So I would recommend that people who are thinking, companies who are thinking about an open salary policy, don't look at it in isolation. They think about the entire total reward umbrella and say, what policies do we have? How much clarity do you want to give? I can share my experience that companies who do this really well, and I can talk about my current company, and I can talk about my first company, which is Unilever. Uh, they did this really well. It actually helped employees understand how their compensation is created and how we manage, and so that uneasiness or this question mark, they were trying to hide something or not being too open, it goes away. Obviously, to your point, you also need a mature sort of employees and managers in the company, but to that extent, even mature HR teams as well.
Oh, great. We can take, we still have 1 more minute actually, and we can take maybe one more question. Or I talked earlier to Sajjad, he said like we can stay a little bit more if you have more questions, so you can drop in. And by the way, when you raise the hand, please keep the icon on so that I can see who's raising the hand. Okay. So we have a question actually in the Q&A. So it's the question goes like this, that when you want to bring in a pay transparency to your company, and as an HR, you are not really the decision maker, so you have to also talk to the senior management. So how do you actually plan with them the strategy, and how you make them see from the HR point of view that this is, for example, important for your company, you should do this?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to share like a personal experience in some of these sort of sensitive discussions. There are two things that I would bring into the discussion. First one is an external perspective, right? I talked about some of the research, that what are the positives of having an open salary policy, right? That's the first one. That by bringing an open salary policy, these are the 5 things we're going to achieve. That's number one.
Okay.
Number two is there's ample research out there that I usually rely on, especially on these sort of tough conversations that I'm expecting with the leaders. When you have facts and figures, I think it changes the conversation completely, right? Especially, like I said, compensation is such a sensitive and personal thing to everybody that, people feel very emotional about it. To have a discussion with the leader, number one, you need to have facts and figures. I think in my experience, if you have the right numbers and you have the right research in front of you, they can't argue. They have very strong opinions, but in my experience, each time I've gone back with very like hardcore facts and figures and research, you can't object to that, right? So I would say that whatever you want to do with whatever decision you want to make with them, you take what are the positives and maybe even negatives. So let's be open about it, that these are the 5 things you're going to drive, these are the 2 difficulties you're going to have, but how are we going to achieve that? Number one, very clear change management program, and say through facts and figures and analytics, if you have, why this is a great thing for them. How is it going to drive employee engagement? How is it going to drive employee motivation? And say that, we actually, and the other thing which I think we don't do in HR very well is actually have SLAs. We put things in place, but we never measure the effectiveness or success of these programs. Say that after 6 months or 1 year, we can actually try and figure out if this program, if this open policy is actually working or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have a comment in the chat that goes like, Synopsys has transparent policy, like R&D engineer level 1 has a range of compensation, level 2 has a higher range of compensation. So that's how it goes.
Nice. Great.
Yeah, I think like we are done with the questions and answers, or no, I think we have got one more.
Okay.
Yeah, so there is a comment that goes, so as we understand, the performance feedback should be an ongoing thing. So should it be formal? For example, HR should request filling out forms and show evidence of discussion with employee each 3 months, or HR should just encourage managers to do so and not request some evidence.
Look, at the end of the day, I strongly feel that we can have all the policies and all the structures in place, but the relationship between employee and managers is something that's managed by them. What HR needs to do is, number one, not police around, because I don't think it helps. What we need to do is to create a culture where the employee and managers are having honest conversations, right? At the end of the day, it's the manager that evaluates the performance. They drive performance management, they drive coaching, they drive motivation. You can have the best tools and technology, but if the manager is not supportive, we know it doesn't help. So what HR has to do is to step back, but create enough support for managers to be able to help employees succeed. And you have to think it this way. You have to make managers understand that if the employee succeeds, the manager is going to succeed as well, because managers require employees and they divide their work through employees. So they have to stop policing around, stop filling out forms. I mean, you can do it maybe from a formality point of view once a year, that, okay, set your goals, which is a good thing to have, and then give your performance feedback. But on an ongoing basis, in terms of performance feedback, it should also not be performance feedback, it should be coaching feedback. Let's not be always criticizing that you didn't do this well. Let's have constructive feedback and say, by the way, this is the challenge you're facing. Coach them on what they can do well, and employees would really, really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you very much. So we are actually like 30 minutes over the time. Sorry for that, actually, but if you still have questions, we are here to answer them. If I see like no more questions, maybe we can move forward. And thank you, Sajjad, for your time. Thank you, dear participants, for being cool participants and very, very active. I'm just sharing my screen just to remind you that we have like 2 more upcoming webinars that you can see the topic and the date. The one just 1 week after it is April 28th, the second one on May 6th. And both of them 12:30 p.m. or a Yerevan time, which is the same as Dubai time. We're going to talk about more about analytics and the power of analytics and how to align it with your company purpose and goals. And second of all, we're going to talk about HR, AI-driven HR decision making. And we are here. You can actually, in just a few minutes, yeah, you can see our see our contacts on your screens. Just a few seconds.
Please connect with us if you need any advice or any help in terms of engagement programs. You want, like I said, brainstorm, you want to explore new ideas for your companies, please do connect with us. We're very happy to, like I said, take the conversation forward and see how we can be of any service to you guys.
Sure, yeah, connect with us and drop your questions and your ideas and feedback that you have. I'm very, very happy to have connect with you, and see you soon in the next webinar, just 1 week after this. So I'm just waiting. I think that some people actually want to ask some more questions.
Sure. We can stay a few more minutes. No
Yeah,
problem.
we'll see. I mean, I see some people are kind of typing and see if we can have more questions. Let's see. Yeah. People are saying thanks everyone for the great session. Yeah, one more thing, Sajjad. People are asking if we can share the presentation with them, because many people have wrote me that you have cool presentation, a lot of information. Can we do that?
I might need to take out a few slides which are more confidential, but I think we can share at least definitely some material for sure.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, so if we can do that, we'll send it over to all of the participants who have registered or who have just showed up. Thank you, everyone. Have a great and productive day. We'll see you in the next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.